Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're having a fun VivaTech. So you've got two talks back-to-back on the future of healthcare and how technology is absolutely fundamentally shifting healthcare. I hope to give you a slightly different flavor in this particular section. But just as a quick introduction, I want to introduce our three, whoops, if the slides are working. I want to introduce our three guests here who come from startup companies who are actually working on completely different ways to solve healthcare problems using technology. But just to give you a bit of context here, I think you've already heard that the reason that such an explosion in the convergence of technology with healthcare is because, number one, healthcare systems are struggling with costs. And technology could be a wonderful way to remove many costs, completely change the way the systems work. So there's been a huge movement towards technologies that can truly disrupt the way healthcare is delivered. The second one, which is obvious, is that patients are getting much more centered about taking control of their health, and then several rules recently came into place which allow patients to take more advantage of their healthcare data and actually become more empowered to make healthcare decisions, and this is driven by technology, data, and an understanding of their needs. The third piece is that technologies themselves are getting super fast. The analytics, the micro technologies, the nanotechnologies, and how they're applied to different components of healthcare are also coming to bear right now. And then the last piece is that people are being incentivized. So regulators are recognizing what technology can do and actually jumping ahead and actually enabling the ability to use technology to actually register drugs. We've seen the first digital therapeutic. We've also seen the first real-world evidence indication expansion approved by the FDA. So I think the promise of technology in healthcare is here. You've heard a lot from big companies. We talked yesterday about virtual healthcare provision with Verily. But today I'm going to show you three different types of collaborations with startups looking at healthcare in three different ways. The first one I'm going to introduce is Ofer Leidner, who is the president and co-founder of a company called HAPPIFY. The second one is Deborah Kilpatrick, who works on EVIDATION and with some fascinating ways of looking at patient data in a continuous manner and how that can change healthcare. And the last one is analytics. Alexandre Templier is going to talk about fundamentally different approaches using augmented intelligence. So with that, I'd like to invite our first speaker, Ofer, to talk about HAPPIFY.
Thank you, Ameet, and good afternoon, everyone. Delighted to be in Paris and delighted to be with such great innovators in health and tech. So our story is very simple. We are a digital therapeutics company focusing on mental health. Our journey into the healthcare has started in a very non-traditional way. 7 or 8 years ago, my co-founding partner and myself founded ourselves looking at data that our prior company, who was a casual gaming company, was generating. And we end up having over 60 million people on our platform playing casual games. I'm sure you're all familiar with those. I'm sure many of you have them on your cell phones. And when we looked at the 21 billion hours a year gameplay, we basically said, gosh, this is a lot. This is too much time that people are spending. And if you need help on the math, it's 15 days a year per gamer. This is led us to think that perhaps there's a better way to kind of apply our expertise in engagement design, in getting people to do what we want them to do on devices, and really apply it into a therapeutic area that we really found to be very fascinating. So we turned into healthcare and found that tackling mental health is a really issue that we're passionate about. This is a global epidemic. 1 in 5 people on this planet is walking around with diagnosable mental health conditions, stress, depression, anxiety. Look around you. 1 in 5 people around here likely walking around with that condition. And when you look at mental health and the medical costs and the effect on adherence of that population to medical protocols, you typically see that this population end up costing more for the system. On chronic conditions, 40 to 60% of the population that has chronic condition is walking around with underlying mental health condition. This has been the most neglected health condition in many years and a lot of human suffering. So we basically said, what really happened if we can take our expertise as scientists and game designers and put it all together? What that would see, what that happened. And when you put these methodologies together, something really fascinating happens. Some innovation that really creates clinical data and engagement that leads into the solution that has been deployed now around the world. 4 million people that we're able to treat with our solution. We are having clinical results with 25 to 30% reduction in depression, anxiety symptoms. This is done by a solution that is primarily self-care platform. So you can disseminate it anywhere, anytime. Personalized programs that are evidence-based, cognitive behavioral therapy, positive psychology, mindfulness, and other 9 approaches that helps us really personalize the approach for each individual and help that with therapies that are delivered in a digital way. Highly engaging, scalable, and a global solution. This is not a problem for unique problem for a certain area. This is something that is a global and needs addressing. One of the things that gets us really excited about digital therapeutics is the idea that you can now start talking and treating people for the whole body and mind. For years, for the past 100 years maybe, we've been looking at medicine, and the field of medicine looked at neck up, what's happening here in our brain, and neck down, what's happening in our bodies. Well, guess what? Literature and all of us know really well that they're interconnected. And so the opportunity to kind of bring digital solutions that are cleared for results, safety, and efficacy, and match them with therapies of the traditional physical health therapeutic is something that we're really excited about. And then when you look at an example of what's possible, if you're looking at patients that are kind of addressing challenges around body and mind, multiple sclerosis patients, what if we could actually combine some therapies and enhance the patient experience and outcomes by addressing anxiety, depression, fatigue, while the drug companies would address the other biomechanics of the disease, so cognitive function, mobility, and motor function. The opportunity to do it together and bring these therapeutics that are effective, safe, and can be disseminated at low cost anywhere around the world is something that we are very excited and passionate and grateful to be having the opportunity to work on.
Thank you, Ofer. Now to talk about a completely different approach from Deborah Kilpatrick. Thank you.
Thank you, Ameet, and hello, everyone. It's our pleasure to be here and tell you a bit about EVIDATION today and the partnership that we have here with SANOFI. So the problem we're trying to solve is that, you know, we've been in about 50 years now of evidence-based medicine in the US and Europe, and that's all great because it means that we're actually treating patients and delivering care on the basis of things that have been shown in controlled clinical trials. The issue with this is that we know that the choices that we make about activity, diet, nutrition, exercise really affect those outcomes once those therapeutics or once those devices are on market in the post-approval setting. And yet, for the last 50 years of evidence-based medicine, that data has fundamentally been invisible to us and to the system. And so we're trying at EVIDATION to make that invisible come up into the visible spectrum. And by doing that, it allows us to look at patients like this. And so it's really time to view patients as people in the context of their daily lives. And thanks to the ubiquity of mobile and digital technologies, we can now do this in a very controlled and permissioned way. So we really focus on unlocking this individually permissioned data across millions of people in the US today, across therapeutic areas, and this allows us to measure health in everyday life in a completely different and novel way. The way that we think about this is one person over time across the journey of the condition that they may have. Now, one person, as we know, can have many conditions, and that's sort of also the point. Instead of looking at just a person as a diabetic patient, that person may have diabetes, but over the course of their lives, maybe they also have asthma, maybe they also have allergy. Regardless of this, we can actually begin to look at them as a combination of lots and lots of data that labels them, the severity of their disease, and whether or not therapeutics or the therapies that they're on are working or not over the courses of longitudinal periods of time. And so we like to think of this as objective data from everyday life. And this is permissioned, directly generated from and off the patient through wearables, both clinical and consumer grade, and all kinds of connected devices that are in our daily lives. When we actually combine this with different types of phenotypic data that have been used in the clinical setting for many years, whether it's from an electronic health record or whether it's from lab data or different diagnostic tests, you can begin to get a picture of a person with a condition rather than just the understanding of a patient in the clinic. What this allows us to do is we can think of biomarkers as now being digital, not just molecular. We can think of assays as being continuous and flowing, not just in the robot on using a chemical reagent or using a plate. And we can do things like direct assessment. You know, it's about, can a multiple sclerosis patient be measured from a perspective of their activity level in terms of how well they're doing on a given therapeutic day to day? Yes, of course, that's technologically possible if the individual permissions it. Can we actually look at consistency in daily behaviors like sleep to understand their journey as a patient and the severity of those symptoms, including whether or not they're actually getting better or worse over long periods of time? Behavioral inference is something that's at the core of this. Something as simple in concept as a routine pattern is actually quite important to whether or not that person is going to adhere to lifestyle management, to certain dosing patterns, and to all kinds of activity that may be recommended by their physician or their caregiver. Clinical inference, of course, as ultimately is what we can understand matters a whole lot, not just in trials, but outside the context of controlled clinical trials and what we now refer to as real-world data and real-world evidence, which really is going to underline the future of how we understand patient outcomes in the future of how medicine is going to work. So EVIDATION and SANOFI have created a very broad partnership that allow us to value these kinds of measurements across the product lifecycle. So at one end of the spectrum, you can think about measuring symptoms and daily patterns associated with disease in terms of symptom severity in a whole new way. At the other end of the spectrum, you can imagine once a person is on therapy in the post-approval setting, understanding if their quality of life is improving, understanding what the daily burden of disease is, we can measure this in a whole new way. Now, what this allows us to do from a product standpoint is we can create value definitions in a new way, and we can create an understanding of the patient journey in a whole new way, which we believe when we put all this together across the life cycle of a product and across the burden of disease in a given therapy area, we can really think about improving outcomes at a scale that simply wasn't possible before. So one of the things we've done as an example is we're looking at diabetes and the impact of influenza in a whole new way. Now, it's long been known that in the case of type 2 diabetics, when they get influenza, it actually disproportionately hurts them relative to people who do not have diabetes. For example, we know that they're at higher risk for pneumonia, and we know that they're in the acute setting after flu, extremely higher risk for ischemic cardiac events. This has never been measured at a population scale before in terms of whether or not this is proving out in the real world outside clinical trials. In fact, we've done a lot of studies now to show that it is, and we've taken an interventional study in the US in a randomized way, virtually enrolling, touching over 100,000 people, and looking at the impact of digital interventions to impact vaccination rates for flu during the flu season, live as it's increasing in prevalence across the US geographically, to understand if we can impact this in the real life setting of a diabetic person. And so we're very excited about this work. We look forward to talking about it more in the future as the results become more and more clear, but we think this will revolutionize the way that we view influenza risk in diabetes in their daily life as just one example of what we can do together.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Thank you. For our last speaker, Alexandre, then we'll get into some Q&A. Alexandre.
Thank you, Ameet. I'm very happy to be here today to introduce Quinten and what we do with SANOFI. Quinten is a data science advisory and tech company. There is a lot going on artificial intelligence right now, and when you look at what happens on the market, humans have already been outperformed and replaced in many elementary cognitive tasks. In Quinten, we think there is more value in augmenting humans rather than trying to replace them, especially when it comes to dealing with complex systems. Let's see how we work in a few steps. First of all, you have to understand what people want to achieve, of course, and what is at stake. Depending on that, you identify the relevant data sources and you actually get what you have. You never have the ideal data set to solve a problem. So one of the unique capabilities we have in Quinten is to define the appropriate, optimal data analytical strategy in order to do what is expected using the data you actually have. Now, when it comes to extracting value from this data, of course, we do typical analytics with analyzing and describing what happened in the past, predicting what is likely to happen, and also formulating recommendations, data-driven recommendations, as people do using machine learning. But what we do, which is quite unique, is actually industrializing the generation, validation, and activation of a whole new set of knowledge that we extract from the data. It's quite spectacular to see how quick we are able to regenerate and complete, add to a set of knowledge that have been acquired through research over decades, just in a matter of weeks or months, and then activate those knowledge for decision makers on the field. Of course, this activation has to respect the way people take decisions. And most of the time, people don't want to change. They just want more power and amplitude. So, in other words, accessing or having available knowledge they wouldn't have access to if there was just without this kind of tools, and ability to manipulate those knowledge to take an optimal decision. And this is basically what we do in all the sectors we work on. We work on multiple sectors, like banking, insurance, automotive, aerospace, but we are very specialized in healthcare. That led us to build this strategic partnership with SANOFI, with two major type of projects. The first type of projects is around data-driven medicine, which basically consists in hacking patient heterogeneity within patients' integrated data in order to produce reproducible, interpretable, and actionable insights that help better target the treatments beyond the usual empirical medical decision criteria. But beyond this, there is a huge challenge for the pharmaceutical industry to improve efficiency. We all know that there are a lot of R&D program failure for one single success of a product that is approved. And the more those programs advance, the more data they generate. And it's striking to see, when you look back in the past, the fact that this industry took a lot of time to switch from a data generator to a data consumer in order to improve the success rate at each step and refine hypotheses, generate new hypotheses. I see SANOFI is very well engaged in this transformation, and we are thrilled, very excited to be part of this journey.
Thank you very much, Alexandre. Thank you. So you've seen just 3 different approaches of how technology can transform not just healthcare, but actually our industry. What I'm going to do is just ask the panel a series of questions that are particularly pertinent. I'm going to start actually with one question that I'm not sure is front of mind, but is incredibly complex. It's the issue of trust. It's the issue when you're using analytics, or are patients willing to give up their data? And what does it take to do it? And Deborah, maybe you can talk a bit about consent. You know, you talk about the way that you get consent. Because what you've managed to achieve is remarkable, because it's very, very hard for people to give consent on a repeated basis, to give up so much information. Can you tell us a bit about how did you do that and how important that is to what you do?
Absolutely. So EVIDATION today is connected to millions of people across the U.S. in all 50 states in a very trusted and permissioned way. And what that means sort of on the ground, if you will, is at any moment in time, the individual who has turned on that data stream and permitted us to ingest it can turn it off, number one. And we permit them to go into studies if they meet inclusion criteria for clinical research under informed consent, which is an additional layer of consent. At any point in time, they can stop that data from flowing. They can leave that consented process. But I think what's also important is the idea that we can sequentially reconsent people over time, because the data that we're ingesting is continuously flowing. Right? It's continuously flowing every minute of every day. And so that means we have longitudinal streams of information and data about people that are going on for years. And so at any point in time, we can re-consent for use of data that may have occurred or we have ingested in the past, and we can consent for future use of data that we may be ingesting in the future. And so this idea that you can close the loop with people and sequentially re-consent for data use over time has never been more important, and we're very proud that that's architected into our system.
And I think for many of the startup companies who may be here and interested in entering into digital health, you know, the issue of trust and making sure that people understand what the data is going to be used for it's an absolute imperative. And I think, you know, it'd be worth just making sure that you've really deeply considered as you go forward how to actually develop those technologies, but also it's what the regulatory frameworks around this are going to look like in the future. And the ability in a world where there's constant communication and constant data feedback, this whole consent process is absolutely a critical part of what you need to be thinking about. Just going to turn to Ofer and say, Ofer, you know, mental health. Why mental health? And do you think that you know, using digital technologies in the future, you can actually change fundamentally the way mental health is treated?
Yeah, so for us, mental health has been a condition that we kind of like to think about as a meta condition. If you're looking at every single disease, you're most likely going to find an underlying depression and anxiety, so that the ability to take care of those endpoints and then kind of see the impact on other endpoints is just fascinating. So the combination of meta-condition approach across diseases, and also if you look at a number of providers that can actually treat the disease compared to the need on the population, this makes this category particularly primed for solutions that provide access at scale. So these combinations actually led us to say, let's solve a problem that is burning, that has been neglected, that is primed for solution with digital technology.
So one of the things just to consider is if you just take places which are remote or underserved, I mean, it's already hard enough to get specialist physicians or physicians in places like Africa, for example. And there's a lot of mental illness in Africa where there's just not enough specialists or people who recognize it, or there may be stigmata around it. But the ability to actually deliver directly to patients a remote digital therapeutic, which is validated and proven, can do one of the unfulfilled promises of can we truly democratize health and distribute health in a particularly new and compelling way using some technologies. And I think it's a very interesting approach.
Yeah, I think what, you know, the ability to deliver both engagement and patients that are really actually using the intervention as well as outcomes is something that we spent years in perfecting and optimizing. It's a never-ending job, that's the one thing I would say. And really kind of, you first need to have people that are actually using and engaging over the period of time so that the protocol would actually be delivered. And then when you see the outcome and you elevate patients' mental health, the world that happening after that is just fascinating. We're just starting to research what that means in terms of biomarkers of diseases, in terms of behaviors. We're super excited about that condition as a meta condition.
Thank you, Ofer. Alexandre, we talk a lot about AI, and we don't talk about it as really augmented versus artificial, right? And could you tell us a bit about what are the real differences between the two, and what do you see as the main advantages, particularly in healthcare, especially when AI has got this whole ethical baggage or trust baggage, the black box baggage? So maybe you can talk a bit about that.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, actually, of course, it's a lot. It has a lot to see with semantics, and artificial intelligence is actually headed to replace humans, you know, and many people think that when talking about artificial intelligence, we're actually talking about something that could sometime be as intelligent as human, even perhaps more, whereas in fact there are vertical algorithms dealing with vertical tasks. Now when it comes to healthcare, can we have a specific task that's fully automated? Yes, it already exists. The question is how risky the decision or the conclusion is, and it's a question of responsibility. So we believe that aside from very simple cases where the risk is low and guidelines are very clear, where you can envision some fully automated processes, the doctor, the physician will stay in control of the thinking process. What he needs, though, is tools in order to amplify his intelligence and is able to reach to relevant pieces of actionable knowledge that are relevant for the patient he has in front of him. And this is the difference we make between augmented intelligence and artificial intelligence.
No, thank you very much. Deborah, I'm going to ask you a bit about this continuous measurement. What sort of the real meaningful insights you can get from consumers that you think will really change healthcare or change healthcare decisions? What kind of things do you think you'll see?
I think in the first order, we're going to understand symptoms and episodes of exacerbated symptoms much more in a granular way than we've ever done before, because we'll be looking at them in the context of our daily lives instead of just looking at them in the context of my clinic visit to my primary care physician or perhaps my specialist visit. I think there are some areas which are even going to have nearer term impact, particularly in the area of consumer health. Right? If we think about the most real life of healthcare today, it's walking into a pharmacy and choosing and purchasing an over-the-counter medication, right? Or perhaps a generic medication that's over-the-counter. And I think that those events, those choices that we make believing that we're going to get better, right? Do we actually do it? I mean, is there ever actually been a way to measure the impact of, in the consumer health space of daily choices about medication A versus medication B? Not really, because it wasn't a construct that was measurable. That is completely measurable now with continuously flowing data, because we're capturing all of this in the context of the data flowing. I think in the area of consumer health, the other thing that's quite interesting is those events are often seasonal. If you think about when we need allergy medication, when we need cold medication, when we get the flu, these are seasonal events, right? They are specifically across times of the year when we know that they're likely to occur. It's also seasonal in the case of large geographies in different places at different times, right? So the ragweed season in the US starts in the east and moves across to the west. One of the most fascinating things about some of our studies in allergy in the consumer health space is that we can time those studies to be actually overlaying with activation of allergens in the air geographically. So we truly can time the contextual measurement and the data ingestion in a very, very granular way that was never possible before.
Thank you. I think in the world of omics, do you think we've actually got to the point where we can actually describe the behaviorome?
That is an aspiration. If you go to EVIDATION.com, you'll see us say, you know, we're studying the behaviorome. And whether that's true explicitly or not remains to be seen, but we do believe that the construct of genomics and the management of information can be applied to behavior, and that's why we refer to it that way.
Thank you. In the last kind of minute, I'm just going to ask each of you, just what most excites you in the digital world, and what you think the biggest transformation in health is going to be? Just a short answer from each of you. So I'm going to start with Deborah. Do you want to go first? You've got the mic.
Sure, I'm happy to go first. I think that we're entering an age where, you know, we become a patient with a chronic disease, perhaps even in our 20s. We can be in the clinical trial for a therapy that may end up making us better. In the post-approval setting, we'll be part of that data being used in value-based contracting, and on and on and on throughout our lives. We will also be able to be paid for the use of that data. That data is our asset that people and companies will permission us to use, which gives us a chance to monetize it in healthcare beyond just the improvement of our health.
Thank you. Ofer, you've got a mic in your hand.
Yeah, so I'm really excited about the new frontier of mind and body, the ability to connect both and study the relationship in kind of a large-scale environment in real world where you actually help and change people's life. That's what excites me most.
Thank you. And Alexandre.
Yeah, well, 25 years ago, when I first met medical doctors as an engineer, I was absolutely surprised about the fact that the experience generated by patients on the field was lost for everyone. And I think what's happening right now will make it possible very soon to actually leverage the experience of all for the sake of everyone.
Thank you very much. So we're out of time. I just hope that this gave you a flavor of different approaches in healthcare and encourage why big companies like SANOFI need to interact with the technology companies that are actually present here and are all over the world, because you're doing incredible stuff for healthcare, and we want to help you to capitalize on it. So thank you very much for your time, and have a good day. Thank you.